It may be called the Invisible War, but you can hear about it right here on the EWA Podcast. So sit back and enjoy. All right, and that was our new intro music to the podcast, even a little old school flavor. Jeff, I know you didn't get a chance to hear it, but it was the old school WrestleMania theme. You know, the one with the guitar where it's like bang, yeah.
Yeah.
That's what we use. So just imagine that you heard that, and welcome to the EWA Podcast. And want to welcome my guest this week, the man with the unenviable task of following up the 2-hour Newtcast, the 2.5-hour Newtcast. But if anyone can handle it, it's this guy. He's got plenty to talk about, and I look forward to this. So, Jeff, welcome to the podcast, bud.
Thank you, Craig. And of course, yeah, I get to follow the Newtcast, as you put it, but been looking forward to this for a while, and looking forward to what's going to transpire tonight, for sure.
And in case you can't tell, Jeff is podcasting from prison. No, I'm just kidding. I'm just giving him a hard time. It's a stock microphone, but it's all right. You sound great. It's not lagging. But, yeah, so here we are. We're 1 week removed, and I'd hate to take the Onyx away from you, but I got to ask you, what was your reaction to the Newt podcast last week?
Very impressive. It's interesting to get into the mind of someone who, to be quite honest, has been a bit of an enigma. He's done quite well of maintaining, I wouldn't say his persona, but his level of involvement with the Fed while remaining somewhat mysterious and somewhat personal. But still a very interesting show. Put a lot of light onto the process of how a show gets put together, and just the amount of work it takes to be general manager of a place like the EWA.
Now, Jeff, how long have you been around in the EWA?
I joined in March 2010, I believe. So I've been around for 3 years and some change now. And
has Newt been in charge the whole time that you've been in the EWA?
He was not. I joined when John was in charge. He was general manager pretty much through Super Bowl 10 and up to RWB, Red, White, and Bruise 2011. Mm-hmm. And that's when the changeover to Dev started. And then, of course, Newt took over about, I think, 2 months after that.
All right, so you were kind of here in the heart of all of it. So what are your thoughts on Newt's run since he took over?
Obviously, I'm on record, and people have known that I was somewhat highly critical of the way Newt handled things in the beginning. I'll just put that right out there immediately. Mm-hmm. And it was a different style to adapt to. I was not in a good place personally with some things going on. And, there was some issues there. You've alluded to it when you talked with John on the podcast about I wouldn't call it dissension, but disagreement on Twitter and on the boards, and how that kind of got hashed out. I think that was Super Bowl 11, right prior to that. And to be quite honest, since then it's been, I wouldn't say touch and go, but for the past year or so, ever since I started the Invisible War in earnest, he's been quite receptive and quite accommodating with everything that's been going on, both in my personal life, as I'd mentioned on the board about a month ago, and with everything going on in the Fed. So at the time, currently everything is quite copacetic, to be honest with you.
Right, and the Invisible War, a tremendous storyline that you've crafted and worked out with others. I don't want to downplay it, and we'll get into it more here in a second, but let me ask you this. If you could sum up the Invisible War storyline as a whole in 5 sentences or less, how would you do it?
That's a very good question. I would have to say, in beginning with sentence one, it was a massive undertaking that was very, very much a story with a lot of moving parts, at some points overwhelming, some points underwhelming, and with a somewhat satisfying conclusion.
Right. And when the Invisible War was in its heyday or in its prime, who, as handlers, were the main contributors to it, along with yourself?
Cameron, John stepped in at one point, and Dan had some input, B-Rye and Evan Bourne, and those were the main contributors to it at the time.
And were they all contributing to the story, or was it kind of like your baby and they just played characters in this story?
They contributed to some of the story. Cameron and I were the main sort of collaborators with it. We had planned it about a year in advance. We're both fans of the Puro scene, and this was kind of like our chance to really realize what we had kind of imagined what it would be like getting all these people in one place together at one time. And then Evan Bourne stepped in mainly to take on the lead as the Zaibatsu leader,
right,
and how that kind of played into it. Dan was more of an advisor to see how everything would slot in. John had to take over for some of Cameron's parts, I believe, for a month or two. And B-Rye was going to have a bit more into it, but I guess he fell into some personal things and just kind of had to step away, and it's good to see him floating around the boards as an alumni here and then.
Were there times when you felt like the Invisible War storyline itself was almost too big for the EWA, where it was almost like set in its own little universe? Do you know what I mean?
Yep. I believe there were probably 2 or 3 points where it had almost gotten too big and had, again, too many moving parts to it. And what was seen in the Fed was probably about, I'd say, 60 to 70% of what we had actually set out and planned to do.
Mm-hmm.
But time and other things kind of played into it, and unfortunately, there were angles that were never really fleshed out that were started, but never really came to fruition.
Right. I think everybody's kind of run into that, and when you have such a big story like that, it's hard to keep everything in line, because when guys start to gain steam and gain traction, they have a tendency to, people want to work with them, and they kind of veer off the path that they think that they've had set, the whole time. Like last summer, I believe a couple of members of the Zaibatsu were the last members to dethrone the Vegas Connection for the tag titles. Is that correct?
Yes, and there's a bit of a story behind that, if you don't mind me taking a few minutes.
Go ahead, yeah. The floor is yours, bud.
About a month prior to that, the gentleman who handled Christopher Daniels passed away.
Mm-hmm.
And I had, as I mentioned before on the boards, had assumed the mantle and went pretty much to Evan Bourne and said, okay, we've got to do this. Mainly because it would be a good way to begin to pay tribute to what my friend had accomplished in his tenure in EWA. And it was going to help me kind of deal with the fact that he had passed away. Mm-hmm. And that sequence of RPs and that whole thing was, and again, I owe Evan Bourne a great debt for the effort he put in, because the last RP he did for that I was not in a good place, and I just said, it has to meet certain criteria, but there were certain segments of that I couldn't really bring myself to write. Mm-hmm. And stepping into my friend's shoes for the first time was a very difficult and interesting experience. But yes, we were the last ones to beat Vegas Connection, and the tag title run that they've had has been nothing short of remarkable, and of course it's paid dividends with the match coming up at Lethal Lottery, and of course with just the fact that they've solidified themselves as true icons of EWA.
Right. And that was a great achievement for the Zaibatsu to basically, for this long of a time, be known as the last people that have defeated the Vegas Connection. But where do you think along the way the Zaibatsu lost their momentum and traction, and why do you think that is?
We lost our traction mainly because there were things that we had tried out that never really came into being. I believe we expanded far too fast, and it got too big, almost in the way that the NWO kind of grew and became a bit diluted. And where we lost our way was the Invisible War took up a lot of, almost a year and a half of potential storyline possibilities within other people in the EWA. That wasn't the intention, but that's kind of how things played out. I believe we're in a better place now, but it's going to take some time, and what we've always considered to be our big show, which is Red, White, and Cruise, is coming up after, of course, Lethal Lottery.
Do you think that working within yourselves on the Invisible War storyline has kind of detached your characters from the rest of the EWA universe?
Certainly it's...
Do you find it difficult to work storylines and angles with current EWA roster members because you guys have done so much within the Invisible War storyline itself?
Well, it's not so much the Invisible War storyline, is that if you're around here long enough, you get used to working with certain people. Mm-hmm. There's a level of trust that you build, that you know that they're going to follow through, and that will, it's more motive and incentive to follow through with yourself. Mm-hmm. But, yes, absolutely, I find it that it has somewhat isolated probably all of my characters to an extent in regards to working with some of the newer members like yourself and some of the more recent guys. Mm-hmm. Because of that, because it seems like they're not as relevant as they used to be.
Right. Here, this may be a tough question to answer, and it may lead into further questions. Do you think that using the Japanese wrestlers such as Masato Tanaka and others like him, do you think that there's like a stigma on those characters where people are just like, well, I don't know who that is, so I don't really want to work with that person? I think, do you feel like people are more comfortable working with the characters that they know rather than the characters that are relatively unknown to them?
To an extent, yes, but at the same time, you've got guys like Eddie Kingston and other, quote-unquote niche characters that have been able to more or less relate to everybody else.
Right.
So part of their appeal, per se, is that they are an unknown quantity. That when you get involved with, Liger or Manami Toyota or Tanaka himself, you're getting outside of your comfort zone, and I'm getting out of my comfort zone as well.
Right, and the last major event that Masato Tanaka was a part of was Super Brawl last year. You were a part of Team Blackman. And how was the integration of Masato Tanaka into the Super Brawl storyline? How did that go for you?
It went better than I thought on the initial role play, because I had an idea of what I was going to do, and I had been saving a few things for those particular RPs. The second RP I did was very difficult to do because it was difficult to get myself in the mind of a quote-unquote bad guy.
Right.
when Sandy Hook Elementary School is about 10 miles down the road.
Yes, yes.
And
Now, I don't, this is not me calling you out or anything, but in your first Super Bowl role play, your scene opened with Masato Tanaka gunning a man down.
Yeah, it was ultra-violent. Yeah, it was ultra-violent.
For lack of a better term, he used a gun and shot someone.
Right. And the second RP, in its original form, the prologue was basically going to be a reenactment of the lobby scene from The Matrix.
Mm-hmm.
And the whole point is that he's in this kind of warped dream state, and he's trying to get into the Zaibatsu complex, and he has to fight his way in.
Right.
And it was going almost to be a scene-by-scene duplication of the lobby fight of the first Matrix. Obviously, events dictated that it would be A, inappropriate, and B, very difficult to do. And thus, the finished product that was posted, I believe, 24 hours after the events that happened on the 14th of December.
Mm-hmm. Yes. And then, post-Super Brawl, you went with the storyline of Masato Tanaka, not generally, but basically leaving the Invisible War storyline or adapting it into joining the Sublime Empire. And I don't want to give away spoilers as to what happens to Tanaka. I'll let you talk about that. But talk about the process of leaving the Zaibatsu Invisible War storyline and getting into the Sublime Empire after Super Brawl.
The theme running into the third Japanese deathmatch, which has almost become an annual thing for me, and there's a fun story behind that for the first one, is that there's a song by Nancy Sinatra called You Only Live Twice, theme song for Sean Connery's second-to-last James Bond film, in which, in the book that Ian Fleming does, James Bond effectively dies, gets amnesia, and forgets who he used to be. So, taking that and applying it to the Tanaka character after the end of the Invisible War, after the end of the third Japanese death match against Yuji Nagata, puts Tanaka in such a state that when he's after Super Brawl, Dylan and I kind of came to each other with this idea of how do we escalate the tension between Blackman and Tanaka, but also use this to kind of get the Zaibatsu into a conflict that they have no other choice, both in character and out of character, to kind of get back in gear.
Mm-hmm.
So Dan, Dylan, and I came to an agreement that this was kind of how everything was going to shake out. Dan had to take some time off for professional reasons, and it was left in a state of flux as to how everything was going to play out, because there was a plan in play, and it just never really came to fruition.
So do you prefer planning things out months in advance, or are you pretty adept at making changes on the fly?
Right now, I'm more adept to it, because after this mini feud with Vampiro, kind of getting back to basics and realizing that the long-form story isn't the most advantageous thing in EWA right now, as it used to be probably a year or 2 years ago. But with things going on right now, I believe that maybe those times have passed for the long-form, kind of locking yourself in and being more fluid with how things play out.
Right, and I think that's a reflection of the WWE product as well. Like, storylines aren't thought out long term, and aside from Angle and Punk, there hasn't been a whole lot of long thought out storylines in the EWA in the last year or so. I would say Punk, Angle played out well, and then Carino, Burchill. And then really other than that, it's been... But that's kind of the nature of EFEDs is, you don't want to hog the spotlight for yourself, so you just kind of do month to month or months to months and work with whoever's next,
and I'll be quite honest, a lot of things happen in people's personal lives.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, in the span of the kickoff to the Invisible War to the end, there have been 2 hurricanes, a very, very bad snowstorm, and of course the incidents on the 14th of December in this area alone that have kind of detracted from my focus in kind of carrying things through. And there were things planned that just couldn't happen because of events out of my control.
Right. I think we all run into that kind of stuff too. So it's not, it's not anything that hasn't been a problem for other people, But what does the actual word Zaibatsu mean?
Zaibatsu, in the current definition of Japanese society, is it in itself is an entity of corporations. It is a sort of like a collective of industries under the auspices of a single level of control, but for the single goal of dominating that area of your market. It's a business term, but it's been used other places as well. But that's, without going into the literal meaning of it, that's kind of how to break it down.
I see, and that plays into the Invisible War storyline because there are different factions and stables, almost for lack of a better term, that are involved in that, right?
Correct.
I see. Aside from the people that you've worked with during your time with the Invisible War, what handlers and players would you say that you've most enjoyed working with?
Dylan, John, and when I mentioned Dylan, I meant Dylan from the United Kingdom. The other Dylan, there was a planned storyline very, very long time ago when I just joined up. That never came to fruition, but that could have been great. He's a good guy, though, as well. John, of course, Shane Douglas. Vampiro's been a pretty good guy to work with, very easygoing. And I have yet to work with Dan, but he seems to be a guy that's fantastic to work with for sure. We haven't done much, but I foresee that changing. And, of course, Vic, who is probably one of, if not my greatest opponent, and one of the people that I hold in very, very high regard in this place.
Yes, before Masato Tanaka became heavily involved and invested in the Invisible War storyline, he was a Grand Slam champion and had a hell of a face-off with The Rock that culminated in a Hell in the Cell match. Is that correct?
Mm-hmm. New Year's Revolution, yep.
Yes, and talk about that time in the EWA for yourself.
After Super Brawl 10, when the Zaibatsu had won, and I'm not going to say that we had expected to win. We knew it was going to be tough. Vic and his team were very, very heavily favored. And there always tends to be one team that it's more or less theirs to lose more than it's somebody else's to win. Mm. Although this year was pretty much wide open. We had won. I had just won as Hamada to become Vixen champion, and I was at that point the Triple Crown champion going into 2011, knowing that Vic would be my first opponent as champion. And so very, very early on, I started to prepare for the eventual confrontation between the two. And John became involved with the storyline, and it set up what I thought to be one of the best matches of the year, well-written matches, of course, and also probably one of the largest challenges I had to face, not only defending the Grand Slam, but then Triple Crown, and also the Vixens Championship in one evening.
That's a full load, my friend.
That's a full plate for sure.
No doubt. And not to get away from wrestling, but it actually still kind of ties in. I want to talk about your personal life just for a bit. A lot of the new people obviously won't know this, but those that are close to you know that you are an elected official and that you have done some work on both of Linda McMahon's Democratic campaign trails or conventions, or what's the word I'm looking for? Democratic campaigns. We'll just call it that.
She ran on the Republican ticket.
Oh, did she?
Yes.
I apologize. I
Okay.
did not look that up. I apologize. Yeah, well, maybe that's why she lost. Maybe if she was Republican or Democrat, who knows? So yeah, why don't you talk about what was it like? Did you have interactions with Linda McMahon on a regular basis?
Not on a regular basis, no. When working with the campaign, there is a huge staff that goes into running a campaign at the state level, especially for Senate. She invested between the both campaigns $77 million. And that's a hell of a lot of money to run and lose twice. But I met her on several occasions. Very nice woman. Met Stephanie, her husband. I did not get to meet Vince. I was a little disappointed, but I know stories about what Vince pulled on the campaign trail, and I'm kind of glad I'm not around for that.
Yeah, so you got a chance to meet Triple H, is what you're saying.
Yeah.
And of course, what were Triple H and Stephanie like in person?
Very nice, very cordial. He is a monster of a man. He is massive. I mean, he looks big on TV, but in real life, it is almost awe-inspiring how big this guy is.
Mm-hmm.
And to see him walk around amongst, the crowd and shaking hands and stuff like that is interesting. He's a natural showman. And of course, everyone knows that. But to be in that kind of setting that's not necessarily the wrestling side of things, but more the public relations, he was very impressive. And the same thing with Stephanie. Yeah.
Do you have any neat or cool stories from the 2010 or 2012 campaign?
One that I heard happened in, I think it was the West Hartford office of the McMahon campaign. About 5 days before the election, when polls were starting to tighten up and this looked like it was going to be a close one, Vince walks into the campaign office, and it's not Vince, it's Mr. McMahon.
Mm-hmm.
And he was full on like the guy you see on TV.
He was in character.
I don't think this was character. He was legitimately pissed off because millions of dollars were going to waste, and it was, apparently there were chairs involved. That's all I know.
Wow. In your professional opinion, Jeff, why is it you think Linda McMahon lost those two elections?
In 2010, she lost because she alienated women in the state. In 2012, with President Obama on the ticket in a very democratic state like Connecticut, any Republican on that ticket was not going to be successful.
Mm-hmm.
And she ran against a candidate by the name of Chris Murphy, who had a record amongst the Democratic base that rallied out support. And the president was very willing to come up here and campaign for now Senator Murphy, as he was willing to come up and help now Senator Richard Blumenthal, who is the former Attorney General of Connecticut.
Mm-hmm. I see.
Without getting too technical and too in-depth, that's one of the main reasons why.
Right, and I wouldn't expect you to come on and be like, it's this motherfucker's fault why she lost, So, yeah, I understand that. Jeff, it's time for our game.
All right.
And it's a favorite coming back, making its third or fourth appearance. We're going to do a little penis in your anus action.
And now it's time for...
Penis in Uranus, 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 penis in Uranus.
And, Jeff, the concept of this, and for those listening, if this is your first podcast, go screw yourself, because it's number 11. You should have been listening to all of them. But if this is your first podcast, the concept of penis in Uranus is Jeff's going to talk about candidly and without editing or anything. Jeff's going to talk about something in the EWA or WWE, whatever Jeff wants to talk about, something that irks him, that bothers him, something that he wishes he could change. All right, Jeff, you ready?
Yeah.
All right, the floor is yours, my friend. What is the biggest penis in Uranus?
About the WWE is mainly that they just don't give a shit. Mm-hmm. They really don't. And it's one thing after another with them. And when they seem to throw people a bone, like making Ziggler champion or pushing the right kind of guy, they fuck it up with stuff like Kofi Kingston being United States champion and stuff like Team Hell No going far too long with that bullshit gimmick that they were pulling. And it's just, they got to stop with the slapstick. And it's not the return to Attitude Era stuff, because that's just not feasible.
Right.
But that stuff just pisses me off. It's the hokey bullshit that isn't really that necessary anymore.
Right. You have a 3-hour show. You have a chance to tell great stories, and you're wasting segments on the WWE app. You're wasting countless segments on the WWE app.
Yeah, that's ridiculous. But you know that stuff's predetermined anyway. So you could go and text and pout and do whatever. Yeah. So yeah.
If Monday night's poll was true, the Great Khali would have won as a joke. Seriously, that's what I'm saying. All right. Or he would have got more than 19% or whatever it was. Do you have any gripes about the EWA?
Outside of the banners being updated, and I think a little more confusion in where wrestlers or where individuals kind of fall in terms of the pecking order. Mm-hmm. I think it should be a little bit more structured in terms of, okay, you win X amount of matches, you get to this point, you challenge for number one contender, you're the next guy that gets the title shot. I think everything's very fluid as to how you get to the title shot outside of racking up wins and gaining momentum. But you could be on Slam for 6 weeks in a row, not have a match, win 2 matches, and then all of a sudden you're in contention for a title shot. So I think that kind of stuff needs to be a bit more structured. Other than that, though, at the current time, things seem to be running a bit well. Would like to do a little bit more with the Vixens division, of course, but there are only a handful of us out there. So it's kind of stupid, I guess, to go against each other each week and kind of burn the potential fuse out when there aren't that many of us left right now.
Right, there's no sense in just drubbing it to death, beating each other up over and over on a weekly basis when, there's no one else to fight, right? Mm-hmm. Well, Jeff, I think we have enough here for a podcast. I want to thank you for coming on. This is generally a pretty late podcast, and I know we had to go back and forth on finding a time that worked for us, so I'm glad that we were able to get you on. This is like the third week we've tried to get you on the podcast, so it's nice to finally have you here, and, it's always good to have someone new on and have them talk about things that, are important to their characters, because there are listeners out there that, have no idea what the Invisible War is. Like, there are people that have joined that, haven't seen your ketchup thread or that sounded like a thread about the condiment ketchup. But what I mean is the thread that catches you up on the Invisible War storyline. So they have no idea that this giant, elaborate, multi-person story that has been going on for a long time has even existed. And so it's nice to have you on to get the word out and tell people about what it is that you're doing.
Well, again, it's been very good and fantastic to be on and kind of share those stories, but, I do intend to get Hamada and everybody back in gear sooner rather than later to get them back and kind of putting them in this new environment with all these new people. And there's some fantastic talent in the Feds right now, but I hope to put what I'm calling like a director's cut version of the Invisible War, which will be all the RPs and a good bit of backstory around it, to see if I can fully realize what we had set out to do almost 2 years ago.
Mm-hmm. Well, hopefully all the pieces fall in place and you can get the people back that need to come back, and that can be something that can be done. I know the Red, White, and Bruise is coming up, and you've had a lot of irons in the fire, and working with some non-traditional members of the roster, such as Vampiro, Shane Douglas. I know you've reached out to Jericho as well to work some stuff out with him. So hopefully these people come back, because they're fantastic writers, and you can tell their accolades just by looking at the stuff that they were a part of before. Like people like Vampiro and Shane Douglas, and even Jericho to an extent, are very well established writers and characters in the EWA. So it'd be great to have those guys back.
Absolutely, and I'd really like to work with guys such as yourself, and
thank you.
I think one more match between Vic and I to kind of settle the score. Mm-hmm. I would love to put together at some point, and there's a lot yet to do, and I look forward to it. And if anybody's looking for anything and looking for a way to get back into it, please just drop a PM and let's see what we can work out.
Jeff, I'm going to ask you a question that I already know the answer to, but I want you to go ahead and answer it. Do you feel like your best and finest years of storytelling and RPing are behind you?
If you had asked me that question a month or probably 2 months ago, I'd say yes. I really would. But kind of getting back into it, I had mentioned previously that my match against Vampiro was probably the first one I've had without some kind of structured finish or whatever in a one-on-one setting since, I think, it's probably been about a year and a half. So right now I'll say I think I still have a lot to prove and a lot to do. So I'll say no.
And I concur wholeheartedly. We've talked and we've spoken before, and I think that you have a lot of good ideas and you know what you want to do, and sometimes getting there is the biggest problem of all, and it involves being adept and mindful of the changing situations. But I think that, when you're a talented writer such as yourself, that's just nothing that's going to hold you back. So, I think that you're still due to do some really great things in the EWA in 2013 and beyond. But I want to thank you for coming on to this podcast. Is there anything else you'd like to say before we close it up here?
Just to continue the good work with the podcast.
Thank you.
To the new people who have joined, don't get yourself down about wins and losses. I believe, as in most things in life, is that you get out of whatever you put into, and eventually, things will happen. And outside of that, this is a place to have fun. And I know we take this quite seriously, and I'm not going to lie, I do too. But this has been a place that has helped me through a lot of things. And I owe a lot to a few people, and they know who they are. So I appreciate that. Appreciate their counsel, and just very thankful to be here and be able to talk to you this evening and hopefully in the future.
Well said, Jeff, and thank you once again. And as with every other week, if you want to be like Jeff and come on and join me on the podcast, feel free to send me a PM on the forum. Download the program, Skype, send me a PM, let me know, and then you can add me on there, and I can add you, and we can go back and forth and work out a time to come on. Like I said, Jeff contacted me a few weeks ago. We've been working stuff out, so nothing is out of the realm of possibility. You cannot be too young, too old, too new, too out of the loop. I want members of the EWA to come onto this podcast, talk about their characters, talk about their stories, talk about their history. That's what this is for, to learn about these people, to know them further. So I want more people to come on, more people to want to come on, so please feel free to send me that message. I know that was a little jumbled, but still goes. Want to wish the best of luck to everyone in Lethal Lottery this week. We have a hell of a roster from Steve Blackman all the way down to the lowest person on the totem pole in this, Gregory Iron. So good luck to everyone on that list. And Steve, you suck. Everyone have a great week, and I will talk to you guys next week on the podcast. Thank you much.